Okay, so Aquinas and Hobbes, I've made various comments about this, sort of scattered throughout the various lectures on different parts of the Leviathan. Here, try to sort of bring some of them together. Some of them might be a little repetitive, but bring them all together in one place. So I think the place to start is to go back and talk about the physical world and how each of them see the physical world. And to start there, start with Aquinas. Go back to what Aristotle said about the four causes. Which we talked about some when we talked about Aquinas' five ways. The four causes, just to use the simple example, the four causes of something, we could talk about whether it's change, but let's just say the four causes that make something what it is. So there's the example that the sort of classic example is a chalice, a cup that you would use to drink. The material cause is what it's made out of. So if it's made out of bronze, the material cause is bronze. The formal cause is the actual form that it has, the actual form of a cup or a chalice that it has. That's the formal cause. The efficient cause, the thing that which has caused the unformed bronze to be formed into a cup or a chalice, is the welder or the craftsman, the person who has the knowledge and who actually changes the bronze or somehow or other molds the bronze into an actual cup. And then the final cause, which is basically the purpose, why was it done, is for using the cup for drinking. So the idea of final causes, so the final cause in this sense is the purpose, why something is done. And remember, Aquinas sees all of nature in terms of final causes. He says everything acts for a particular end. Human beings clearly do. Remember, for Aquinas, human beings, our nature is directed towards happiness, towards the good. We act for the sake of happiness, for the sake of the good, for achieving that for ourselves. We don't always necessarily see clearly what it is or make the right decisions about how to pursue it, but we're acting for that end. But of course, Aquinas said everything else in nature acts for a particular end, for an end that's good for it, for its own particular kind of nature, including inanimate objects. Remember, this comes out especially in the fifth way, for instance, when Aquinas says, we look at the world and we see all kinds of things that lack intelligence acting for a particular end. How could this be possible unless there was some kind of an intelligence guiding it? And remember, we said, it's sort of, Aquinas says, it's like if you looked at a row of bullseyes and you saw an arrow fly and hit the bullseye of each one. Now, if you saw a bunch of them just fly by, randomly, and a couple of them hit in the bullseyes and the targets, but most of them just flew by sideways and everything else, it would make sense to think, well, the wind is just blowing that through. That's just, that's just kind of, some sort of chance accident. This is all happening by chance. It's arbitrary. It's just something has blown these arrows through, and we can see that because they didn't hit anything. But if instead we look and we see each target being hit by an arrow right in the bullseye, then even if we can't see where the arrows are coming from, Aquinas' argument is the reasonable conclusion would be that there's somebody or some group of people there who are aiming the arrows and shooting them and making them hit the target. That again, that if we reason backwards from what we see, and what we see are things consistently hitting a particular target, consistently acting successfully for a particular end, then it makes sense that there's an intelligence behind it if those things themselves lack intelligence, like arrows do. So Aquinas says if we look at the world and we see things acting for an end consistently, and these things themselves lack intelligence, then Aquinas says the reasonable thing to think is that therefore there must be an intelligence behind them, sort of guiding them. There must be a reason why their natures are aimed at what's best for them. And we can take two examples. One is a rock, a heavy thing. Aquinas will say rocks want to move downwards because they want to be at rest. Because it's better for them to conserve themselves being at rest. A rock is less likely to break if it's on the ground than if it's down safe, very stable flat surface on the ground than if it's on the edge of a cliff. Of course, the problem with this theory is the rock will fall off the cliff and then shatter. So. And that's one of the things that Hobbes makes fun of, is the idea that besides the idea that rocks and other inanimate objects are acting for what's best for them, the idea that, of course, what you see is that these things just move downward. Sometimes they fall, and when they fall, they shatter. So it's not as if they're always acting in a way that's best for them. So that example of rocks is maybe not so convincing, but of course the other example Aquinas might give is if you cut yourself and the blood clots, and he would say the blood itself doesn't have intelligence, the platelets or whatever it is that's doing the clotting don't have intelligence. So how does it happen? How does it come to happen that the body sort of totally inanimate. Obviously, things that if they're inanimate, they obviously don't have intelligence. Things that are inanimate act for a particular end. Why? How does that happen? And in there, Aquinas might have a stronger point of how does it happen? Why does it happen? Unless there's some sort of an intelligence behind it, and unless these inanimate, physical, material things actually are acting for purposes. If there is a sort of purpose embedded in nature, and each thing has its own purpose, its own final cause, which it acts to pursue. And so Hobbes says, if the physical, natural world is that way, then human beings are that way too. But for Aquinas, I'm not sure what I just said. Aquinas says if the physical, natural world is that way, then human beings are too. There are purposes, there are final causes in nature, and there are obviously final causes for human beings. But Aquinas thinks, it's all one. Human beings are part of nature, and therefore you have to understand human beings in the same terms as you understand nature. Or you could say you have to understand nature in the same terms as you understand human beings. If you think that human beings act for a purpose, if you think that there's a natural purpose for human life, if there's a final cause or a goal for human nature, then there has to be goals for the rest of nature, final causes for the rest of nature as well. You can't say that human beings have a purpose but nothing else in nature does, but human beings are somehow just special. That's Aquinas' view. That's also Hobbes' view. Hobbes agrees and says, you can't say that human beings are somehow distinct from the rest of nature and have a purpose to their life if the rest of nature doesn't have purposes. And that's where but of course Hobbes says the rest of nature doesn't have purposes. To a large extent, the major change that happened in science between Aristotle and Hobbes, obviously it's a massive development. It's not something you can just sum up in a couple of lines, but one of the things you could say about it is that to a large extent it was simply a movement away from understanding science as in terms of final causes, in terms of understanding the purposes of nature, and looking instead at better observations and then ultimately at experimentation to establish the truth. Devising hypotheses, testing them through experiments and so on, classical sort of scientific method stuff. But a lot of that was not so much about improving or doing better what medieval science was trying to do, but simply doing something different. Saying, okay, we're not going to think about nature in terms of final causes anymore. We're going to think about it in terms of these other ways. What we can learn about it through observation and so on, and along with that, they abandoned the idea of final causes and instead said what we see in nature, especially with gravity would be a good example, what we see in nature is a series of impersonal forces, which we can actually understand. We can use reason to understand, to record, to describe, to calculate how these things will work, so it's not like it's a mysterious universe or anything. But what we see is not intelligence operating through nature, not natural things, especially inanimate natural things, acting for ends. What we see is a universe of physical things governed by impersonal forces like gravity. Things that impersonal forces that we can understand, but impersonal forces, not these things acting for the proper end for their nature. And so that was sort of the new way of seeing the physical world. It's not final causes, it's not natural purposes that we see in the world, it's all kinds of impersonal forces like gravity operating, moving things, and we can understand these things very well. And Hobbes says, again, if that's how we're going to understand the physical world, then we have to understand human beings in the same way. If the rest of nature doesn't have final causes, if they don't have purposes or ends, then neither do human beings. So again, the example of a heavy thing. Hobbes would say, look, heavy things fall because of gravity. They're not doing what's best for them. Again, oftentimes when they move downwards, they're just falling and shattering. And so therefore, what you see then is, gravity explains this much better than final causes. That doesn't really make sense when we're talking about rocks and so on. But again, if that's what nature is, if that's what the rest of the physical and natural world is simply things being acted on by these impersonal forces like gravity, then human beings are the same thing. And that's why Hobbes has this very materialistic view of human beings as basically just being matter in motion, because he says that's all that the universe is matter in motion. And just like we can understand the rest of the universe using science, using a science based on math and things like that, so Hobbes' hope is we can understand human beings in the same way. We can have a political science and an ethical science and all of these other things that understand people with this same kind of rigor and precision and so on, and therefore we can actually create a better society on the basis of that science. Now, whether or not Hobbes was successful in that is one thing. But again, the key point here is Hobbes agrees with Aquinas. Human beings are part of nature, and therefore you have to understand human beings in the same way as you understand the rest of nature. If nature has final causes, if nature acts for purposes, then human beings do too. But if nature doesn't, if what you see in nature is just a bunch of physical things being operated on by impersonal forces like gravity and so on, then you have to understand human beings in the same way. And whether or not you want to accept all of Hobbes' materialism, the key idea there is when he says there is no summa bonum, there is no finis ultimus, the sort of thing that, as he puts it, is spoken of in the books of the old moral philosophers. There is no ultimate purpose for human life. Human life really basically has no purpose. It's simply a matter of one desire after another, again, as he puts it, because as long as the human mind is in motion, desire and so on will be in motion, and therefore you'll always want something new, and that's what human life is. It's not pursuit of this one ultimate goal that will make people content or happy, or that will satisfy their nature as human beings. It's simply a constant scramble for a series of new desires that come about simply through our interaction with the rest of the world. Our mind experiences new things, sets new things in motion, sets new desires in motion, and therefore we're constantly being moved along by this desire for some new good, and it just never ends until we die. So, again, Hobbes, Aquinas, very different, but agree that human beings are part of nature and therefore have to be understood in the same way. For Aquinas, there is an ultimate goal and an ultimate good, a final cause for human life. Happiness, the good, ultimately for Aquinas, God, but of course Aristotle said very similar things without bringing in God, and just said the ultimate goal is contemplation. That's the true development of the possibilities inherent in human nature. The highest, fullest development is the philosophical life, contemplation, understanding, thinking. So you don't have to bring in God necessarily. Aristotle really didn't, and had the same basic view. Hobbes, on the other hand, no, there is no ultimate good. Again, human life is just a sort of constant motion of the soul, desiring new things, seeking new things, that constantly changes. And again, it's not that you're getting closer to the truth about the good, or you're wanting things that will more genuinely make you happy. Things are going to constantly change, and it's just a constant sort of cycle of new desires and new pursuits, and so on, that end only when you die. So for Hobbes, there is no ultimate purpose for human life. Now, to some extent, there's something of a substitute for that ultimate good, as we saw, and that is the ultimate evil, the ultimate horror of violent death. And everybody agrees, whatever my plans are, whatever I want, whatever I think I'll want in 10 years, in 20 years, I won't be able to get any of that if I die violently, or if I really die at all. So Hobbes says, so there is this sort of, there is a kind of common basis for political life, but that is just avoiding this terrible negative thing of violent death. The common basis, the common good becomes, again, not common pursuit of the ultimate good for human beings, but common pursuit of avoiding the ultimate evil of violent death. And therefore any law is useful, because any law binds people together. It gives them some sort of order, some set of rules that they need to follow, and therefore gets them out of the state of nature, gets them out of that state where they can do anything they think is necessary to defend themselves, and into a state in which there are rules, and therefore some kind of peace. And Hobbes says any kind of peace, regardless of how unjust you may think some of the laws are, peace of any sort is better than the state of nature. So again, you also see this difference there in Hobbes and Aquinas in terms of natural law. Again, we saw for Aquinas, natural law is basically a series of basically obviously natural obligations on human beings, imperatives, obligations that human beings have based on their nature as human beings. And as we saw, what that means is that it's based on the different goods that human beings have, the different natural goods that human beings have, the different natural goods that they're sort of obliged to or required to pursue in order to really develop and sort of really realize or satisfy their nature as human beings. And because human nature, according to Aquinas, is composite, we have a simple simple physical being that we share with all other physical substances, an animal nature that we share with other animals, and then a distinctly human nature. These different parts of our nature have different goods. The nature we share in common with all other substances, the good is simple self-preservation. So that's one type of good that we have, and natural law does oblige us to preserve ourselves. But that's kind of the lowest good. Then there's the good we have in common with animals. Offspring, educating our offspring and things like that, reproducing and so on. And then there's the good that's unique to human beings, based on our nature as human beings, based on our rational nature as human beings. And that good is to know the truth about God and also to live in society. So the example that Aquinas gives of that is not to offend those among whom we have to live. But although that actually sounds something like Hobbes, who focuses almost all of his laws of nature on the different things you need to avoid, not to irritate other people and not to make them angry and therefore risk violence, like, so don't be proud, be humble and so on. There's various variations on that. But although Aquinas says something that sounds something like that, that's not what he means. He doesn't mean that the real goal is just not to offend anybody so you don't threaten peace. What he means is, that's just the example that he gives. If you offend those among whom you have to live, you undermine society, you undermine the political life. And again, the ultimate goal here is not just communal or political life for the sake of self-preservation. The ultimate goal is communal or political life for the sake of a common pursuit of this ultimate good for human beings, this final cause which is built into human nature, and about which, as Aquinas says, we have no real choice. We have to pursue that if we want to be happy, and we do want to be happy. We don't always understand what will make us happy. We don't always see that clearly or make the right decisions, but that's a necessary part of our nature, is that we desire this ultimate good and this ultimate happiness, and we seek it, and in part we require other people to seek it. And of course we require knowledge about God to understand what our ultimate purpose is. And therefore Aquinas says another part of natural law, one of the precepts that derive from that is shun ignorance. All knowledge will lead you to God in one way or another. So it's an imperative of natural law not to be ignorant, to learn, to seek knowledge, and so on. Hobbes, as we saw in natural law, first of all, part of it is do whatever you have to defend yourself in the state of nature. And then the second one, basically join society if others are willing to. Join a social contract if others are willing to. Lay down your absolute right to do whatever you think is necessary to preserve yourself, and join society in order to preserve your own life, which is going to be far more effective. Joining a social contract, joining a society will keep you safe and protect you far more than just fending for yourself in the state of nature. But again, natural law is all about self-preservation for Hobbes. There is no natural law imperative to seek the truth about God or to seek the truth at all. So for Aquinas, or for Hobbes, again, having rejected this whole idea of final causes, of ultimate purposes for human life, that Aquinas has, the only real good that's left is the basic, more or less indisputable, urgent biological desire to stay alive, and therefore that becomes the basis and to some extent the whole content of natural law for Hobbes. Natural law is basically commanding self-preservation, and then all of the different laws that follow from that are the laws that reason figures out of how to best preserve society, the sort of attitudes and habits and so on, and attitudes towards others that we should cultivate in order to keep society relatively strong. So these are, obviously you could say much more about the differences between Hobbes and Aquinas, but these are just some of the fundamental ones that, again, show how they agree about humanity and its place within nature, but then how they agree about the sort of the unity and the way that human beings have to be understood as part of nature, but how they disagree very fundamentally about what nature is and therefore what human beings are.